Do you ever just sit at your desk at work sometimes and think, what the f*** am I doing? Hi, my name is Fohad, I'm 26 years old and I am a workaholic. If you know me, hi, welcome or welcome back, it's great to see you again. If you've just kind of randomly stumbled upon this video, there's a very big chance that you are like me and you work at a good job, you're probably a high achiever, you're probably doing all the things right, but despite all that, you still feel very burnt out, maybe a little bit disillusioned, maybe a little bit unclear of what's next in your life. So I want to just start with this very quick anecdote. I'm about to finish my law degree and everybody I work with knows that I'm studying as well as working full-time. I'll move from being a student and working full-time to just working full-time, which means I'll have a lot more free time, I won't be studying on the weekends, I won't be doing papers at night, so I'm gonna have a lot of extra free time in my life very soon. And I mentioned this to a very high up senior executive at my job, and she kind of said to me, oh, it's great that you're about to finish, what are you gonna do with all this free time? And I just kind of stared at her blankly for a second and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all this free time. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what makes me happy outside of work. I don't know what it is I want to do with this free time. For so much of my life, I've been so focused on filling my time with bettering myself, with gaining new skills, gaining new experiences. But it was always very confronting to be asked, well, aside from work, aside from studies, what is it that you're going to do to make yourself happy throughout the rest of your life? I've been in university for 8 years now, and this is really the first time in my life where I'm looking ahead into my future and I don't see being a student as the kind of anchor to keep me grounded. So now I'm dealing with finishing university. I'm working in the dream job that I work so hard to get. I do some great work. I have this career trajectory that can only go up. But for some reason, I feel like I can't do this. At the end of the day, I still feel empty. So in this video, I really want to talk to you all about my experiences following a very traditional career path, what it's kind of like to work in the corporate world and what that's kind of done to me as a person, and hopefully give you all some helpful advice based on my learnings over the past few years. And the reason I wanted to make this video is that there is a very real epidemic among young professionals around my age. I don't think Gen Z is necessarily there yet, but I do think that if you are someone who is part of Gen Z and you are thinking about following a traditional corporate pathway, that video will hopefully help you navigate your expectations and understand what's ahead, because I don't want people to fall into the trap of being in a very capitalist career trajectory. I didn't want to write too many notes for this video because I just wanted to have a bit of a casual conversation with you, because these are things I've been thinking about basically all day, every day for the past year and a half maybe. But I did write down some topics and brief points that I want to make just so that you can kind of follow along a little bit easier. The first thing I want to talk to you about is my journey so far. So I was a really good student in high school. I always got good marks. I always really valued getting good marks. I mean, I have ethnic parents. Of course, if you also have ethnic parents, you know how important it is to come home with good grades to show your parents. Otherwise, you may very well get slapped across the face. Like, Lord help you if the belt comes out. So after finishing high school, I went straight into university. I did an arts degree and focused on journalism and Renaissance history. Bit of a weird combo, but I loved both elements so much. I initially wanted to be a journalist, but after about a year of doing it, I realized, oh, I don't really want to be a journalist, but I do want to work in media or communications or something like that. So I kept going ahead with it and I did major in it. In my arts degree, I wanted to be a little bit more creative. I wanted to learn about things that I was passionate about, things that were just interesting to me. So I majored in Renaissance history, which is great. Like, my university sent me to Italy twice on their dollar to learn about like the benches outside the Duomo and like what it means to hold power in Renaissance Italy. Like, I love that stuff. So as I was about to finish my degree, I realized, you know what? I want money. So I started doing my master's degree in law, and that's where I am now. My final assignment is due next week. I'm basically finished at this point. On top of that, I've been working pretty much every day of my life ever since I was 15 years old. I got a job at a sandwich shop. For legal reasons, I'm not going to say which sandwich shop I worked at, but suffice it to say, their mascot turned out to be a bit of a pedophile. And then from there, I moved into working in retail. So I've worked in retail in like contemporary fashion, worked in department stores, but more recently, over the past 5 or so years, I've been working in corporate jobs as well as studying, as well as working in retail. For the longest time, I was working at least 3 jobs while studying full time, while also volunteering at a community legal center because I needed to get my CV looking good so that, like, you know, law firms would hire me, which is a whole other issue, right? Like, I could make a whole video talking about how badly students get taken advantage of when they're looking for work, when they're just trying to get started in their industry, especially when it comes to internships and graduate programs. So I work directly with barristers and lawyers. I've done a short stint at a law firm. Basically, halfway through my law degree, I got my current job, which is at one of the biggest financial institutions in Australia. So in the past 3 years, I've worked in a very corporate environment. So I want to get into my next topic, which I've titled, I'm good at my job, so why do I feel like this? So what can I actually tell you about my job? I'm very good at my job. That's not me tooting my own horn. That's not me bragging. That's not me trying to get hired by anyone out there. Like, no. I could literally present you with my performance reviews. It will tell you how good of a worker I am. I really like all the people I work with. All the people I work with really like me. I get paid very well. It's actually the most I've ever been paid because I've always worked jobs like retail and fast food or casual gigs in like different corporate jobs where they pay you by the hour, they pay you a casual rate, which is a good rate, but you don't have that kind of security or long-term salary or, you know, all the extra benefits of like annual leave. I was living with my parents when I first got this job, but I very quickly saved up enough money to buy my own apartment, which is where I'm at now. You know, it's always been a dream of mine to live by myself in the big city, going on adventures with my friends, doing all the crazy things, basically living out my best, you know, Sex and the City fantasies. Because of my job, I'm very comfortable. But all the benefits that I've received from working in this job and the comfortable life that I've built myself, it all kind of means nothing because I'm constantly tired. I am so overworked. I am incredibly burnt out. Outside of work, I can barely function as a human being at this point because I am just so exhausted from having to work so hard in so many different elements of my life, both at work and in my studies and any kind of extracurricular things I'm doing to better my work or my studies. Whether it's volunteering, whether it's extra learning that I'm doing, whether it's extra courses, whether it's a second job that I now have, just because I'm so afraid of the potential loss of this comfortable life that I've built for myself. Having to put on this facade when I go to work is hard, it's tiring. Trying to convince people in my office all day that I'm okay with the way we all live is really challenging. This system wasn't built for our well-being. It was built to get labor. It was built for us to continue to work. And of course, you know, this whole global panoramic that's happened over the past year just kind of brought all of these issues to the forefront because we don't have the ability to escape from this anymore. Normally, you'd be able to take a trip overseas and that'll get your mind off work for a few weeks, or you'll even be able to move jobs if you really wanted to because there was so much opportunity available. All that is so much more limited now as a result of the changing world we live in, whether it's closed borders or being too afraid to even just go out because you might get this virus. The system has really forced us into our current ways that we cannot escape. So we have to figure out a way to get around it. When you get to the point of being so burnt out by, you know, your career goals or your study goals or whatever it might be, even just little tasks become so incredibly overwhelming that you just put it off for weeks or months on end. Despite the fact that it might only take you a few minutes to do something, you just keep putting it off because you're like, oh. I remember reading this quote, and if I find it, I'll put it on the screen somewhere. It was something around how people were truly worried that the 2020 election would have gone so differently because millennials were too lazy to vote. And not because they're lazy in the traditional sense of being lazy, but they're lazy in the sense that they don't have the mental bandwidth to physically fill out a form, wrap it up, and go to the post office or go to the post box and mail this letter out. Little tasks like that have become so synonymous with our working life that we try our best to absolutely distance ourselves from anything even remotely similar. And it's kind of crazy to think that capitalism has created a world where we're so exhausted from working and that we're so exhausted from the daily grind that we don't even have the ability to pay attention to what's happening in terms of our politics or in terms of our leadership or in terms of who we are as people or our morality. And we look at things like race relations or migration or LGBT rights or women's issues, and it's just like these things are dictated by a certain group of people who are really just benefiting from the fact that the rest of the population is too overworked, burnt out, exhausted, and just don't have the mental bandwidth to challenge the norm. And that kind of brings me into my next discussion point, which is around millennials and zillennials. Like, technically I am a millennial, but every BuzzFeed quiz that I've ever done says I'm on the cusp. I don't know, I'll always consider myself a millennial, but you know, who am I to Question BuzzFeed. So millennials have always been kind of labeled as the lazy generation. Always wanting handouts, never wanting to work, always getting involved in, get rich quick schemes. And I totally understand that a lot of that kind of perception comes from a certain group of millennials who might appear to be living a lazy life. For example, influencers or content creators or anyone really working in the digital space. The work kind of seems vapid. It doesn't appear to be as difficult. It doesn't appear to be as challenging. When people just think, oh, this girl just posts photos of herself in her bikini on Instagram and she gets paid thousands of dollars, like millennials never wanting to work. And it's like, no. And that does annoy me a little bit. Like, sure, maybe there are some people just quickly cashing in on the fact that they're hot. Good for them. But I know a few people where Instagram is their full-time job. Like, it's a hustle. Like, they have to do a lot to get money, and it's not easy, especially when you're starting out. Especially when you're not, Kim Kardashian or some bitch who was on The Bachelor or whatever. It's a hard job if you're good at it, and it requires a lot of work if you are good at it. That whole notion of millennials who just want to get rich quick kind of undermines the fact that the vast majority of millennials are hardworking, working in traditional corporate roles, and having to work twice as hard as the older generations to get to the same position that they were in. And it's so demanding, and there's so much pressure, especially when you're under 30, because you're constantly trying to prove the fact that you deserve a seat at the table despite your qualifications, despite your past experiences, despite the fact that you're very good at your job. And it all just comes back to the fact that you're in the early parts of your career, whereas other people may have been working in that job for the past 20 years, despite the fact that the changing technology has made their roles obsolete, and it's the millennials who know what they're doing. It blows my mind how much money people waste on technology when they don't understand technology. It's so frustrating. So I think we need to culturally move away from this idea that millennials are lazy or that even Gen Z are lazy, because otherwise we can't have an honest conversation about the fact that there is an entire generation of people out there who are overworked, who are suffering a lot of mental health problems, who are suffering a lot of disillusionment. And with that in mind, I want to talk very briefly on the idea of loneliness in the corporate world. I will preface this by saying, pre-pandemic, I absolutely truly did love my job. I used to love going in every day, seeing my colleagues, working together on interesting projects, spending time together, getting to know them as people as well as doing our jobs. So obviously the social elements of any job are so important because you want to be able to connect with people no matter what it is you're doing, right? But I think at the same time, for millennials specifically, it's a very lonely world. People who work in corporate jobs who are a little bit older, whether they're baby boomers or Gen X, they tend to have a more settled life. They are usually people who are married, with children, living in suburban houses, and they've got it all figured out, right? They know their job at the end of the day is just a job because they have something more important, and that is their family and their community. And of course, I completely commend all those people because they've got it figured out. They know how to balance work and life because they've been doing it for much longer than we have. And for a really long time, they were doing it without the added pressure of social media. There's a huge level of competition nowadays that just didn't exist 40 years ago because the population wasn't that big. And let's be honest, back in those days, a lot of women weren't working in these jobs, a lot of ethnic minorities weren't working in these jobs, and a lot of LGBT people, and a lot of people who may have been considered on the fringes of society weren't working these jobs out of just general fear or non-acceptance. There's one job available and 50 applicants. Let's just throw them into a Hunger Games situation and see who wins and we'll hire the best one. And again, just looking at comparisons between, baby boomers and millennials, less millennials are getting married earlier in their lives, less millennials are having children, more millennials live by themselves compared to previous generations. And as a result, we have this entire generation of workers who are producing all this labor but have nothing else in their lives because they've been taught that their career ambition and just producing labor was like the highest of their priority. So with all of that, coupled with the fact that over the past year we've seen, this global Pandora just open up all hell on the world, that's when it gets really lonely because you will start to feel like a bit of a slave to this very well-oiled machine. And I don't wish that on my worst enemy because it is a very, very lonely life. I want to now move on to my next point around hustle culture. There are so many articles and so many videos around hustle culture, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But the fact of the matter is everyone knows that hustle culture is not healthy for us It's not healthy for our mental health. It's not healthy for our bodies. So many people work multiple jobs just to stay ahead. And you can't really blame them because you look to your peers and they're moving at such a fast pace and you're just trying to keep up. You know, you see their success and you want the same success. So you just keep running just to stay at pace with everyone else in the world. And this trickles down to so many different elements as well. Like when you think about social media, and you know, people in high school have to deal with the fact that perception of them is also now based on their like counts, their follower count, their subscriber count. Like going through that in high school, that's a lot to deal with when you're just forming. And you know what, if I'm being completely honest, the corporate world is very similar. When you start at a grad role or in an entry-level role, obviously watching the same cohort of people you started with progress makes you want to progress more. And you know, like a lot of things, it comes down to the fact that the corporate world is very hierarchical and there is such an emphasis placed on your position, your title, your role, where you sit in that hierarchy. And it's funny because a lot of the people who live in the corporate world will kind of look down on social media and they'll say things like,
"Oh, I can't believe kids these days care so much about their follower count. Or kids these days care too much about their looks on social media."
Bitch, it's the exact same thing in the corporate world. Go up to someone in middle management and strip them of their manager title and suddenly they have nothing going on in their life. And a lot of that culture has been brought down to the younger generations, and that's where hustle culture has started to really take shape because we are working multiple jobs. I think about the fact that I used to work 3 jobs, I used to study full time, and I used to volunteer. That's 5 different things that was taking up my time, and it is a complete failure of our capitalist system that I had to do that to get to where I am now. Because if I didn't do that, I would have been left behind. I grew up with migrant parents. They were very poor. When I looked at my salary for the first time, it was more money than any of my family had ever made in their entire lives in that 1 year. And that brings me to the realization that the corporate world is very superficially rewarding. You know, yes, you will earn lots of money, but no, you will not be satisfied, because no matter how much money you make in these sorts of industries, there'll always be the ability to make more, even within your own company. So this whole discussion leads me to my next topic, which is, what is the YOLO economy? So I came across this really incredible article on Twitter a few days ago. It was published in the New York Times, and it's called "Welcome to the YOLO Economy." So I just want to read the headline out to you. It says, "Burnt out and flush with savings, some workers are quitting stable jobs in search of post-pandemic adventure." So in this very first paragraph it says, "Something strange is happening to the exhausted Type A millennial workers of America. After a year spent hunched over their MacBooks enduring back-to-back Zooms in between sourdough loaves and Peloton rides, they are flipping the carefully arranged chessboards of their lives and deciding to risk it all. Some are abandoning cushy and stable jobs to start a new business, turn a side hustle into a full-time gig, or finally work on that screenplay. Others are scoffing at their boss's return to office mandates and threatening to quit unless they are allowed to work wherever they want and whenever they want. They are emboldened by rising vaccination rates and a recovering job market, their bank accounts, fattened by a year of stay-at-home savings and soaring asset prices, have increased their risk appetites. And while some of them are just changing jobs, others are stepping off the career treadmill altogether." Now look, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I will link it below in the description. I really encourage you to read it if any of what I'm saying to you today is kind of resonating even a little bit. But essentially, this article just talks about a very specific group of people, millennials, and this group of like overworked but well-paid millennials are realizing that what they are doing is not healthy. Working 40+ hours every week for the next 40 years is not healthy and is not something that excites a lot of people. Add to the fact that the retirement age just keeps going higher and higher and higher up, that our generation actually might not be able to retire until we're well into our 80s, which is a horrible thought. Like, that's terrifying. I don't want to think about the fact that I could be working like this until I'm 80. Like, no. So this article talks a lot about how it's very freeing for a lot of people to now change up their life completely, whether it's quitting their job, whether it's changing their jobs, whether it's quitting work altogether and just not working for a while. And I think it is a bit of a failure on the older generations who haven't yet realized that the younger generations aren't coping and that they aren't able to do this because the expectations set on them in this very rigid and an archaic form of an economy is not healthy and certainly not sustainable. I think for millennials it's a little bit harder because we are already so ingrained into this culture that it's kind of hard to step away from it. But I really, really hope that Gen Z sees the struggles, that they then look at alternative ways of living a life and providing to society and being part of like the economic conversation. And as silly as the YOLO economy kind of sounds, like it is causing a huge labor shortage across the world. Enough younger people are standing up and saying, this is not okay, this is not healthy, this is not sustainable, this is not working for a lot of people. And this article does kind of talk a little bit about how there are a lot of employers a little bit afraid of the fact that they are losing their best workers. You know, the people who are quitting are the ones who are type A personalities, who are really hard work, but really succeeding in their careers and doing a really good job at what they do. And they're the ones who quit because even though they're the best at what they do, it is at the expense of their personal, bodily, mental, and moral health. I mean, yes, there is this huge chance that a lot of people who are quitting their jobs will end up having to go back to work, you know, in a few years' times once they either run out of their savings, want to make another change, or whatever it might be. But it is interesting to kind of consider the fact that we may lose an entire generation of really hard-working, high achievers simply because the capitalist system that built them wasn't there to support them through their growth and through their health. And this entire discussion does boil down to my next topic, which is on privilege. So let's talk about privilege, shall we? Now, look, when we talk about the YOLO economy and quitting your job to either find something new, find adventure, follow your passion project, there is a real sense of freedom that comes with that. But that freedom can only really be allocated to those with immense privilege. It's a very specific group of people, but those people are very privileged to be able to even consider quitting their jobs and following their dreams or following this fantasy project or doing whatever it is that makes them happy. Usually the people who can make these incredibly dramatic life changes, as the article mentioned, are those who are flushed with cash. People who have worked really hard, built up a nest egg, built up assets, built up savings so that if they didn't work for the next 5 years, they'd be fine. There is that group of people. But alternatively, there is another group of privileged people which may ruffle some feathers, so I am sorry in advance, please don't come for me in the comments. But it includes people who have a safety net that isn't their own, whether it's a wealthy family, a partner, whether it's some form of other income that they've got that doesn't require them to physically have to work. Usually people who have wealthy parents to rely on if all falls apart are those that have the ability to make these huge dramatic changes. Now the problem with this is, and again, I'm sorry for making this about race, but usually that group of people are typically Anglo-Saxon who have a very good safety net. And that's no shade, that's no disrespect, that's not to say that those people aren't as hardworking as those who don't have that safety net. But for a huge group of non-white millennials who feel this way and don't have the safety net of wealthy parents, it is far more difficult to even consider the thought of potentially leaving your job to follow your dreams or just not participate in the economic world. And I think this is particularly true for people who are either of Asian or Middle Eastern descent. We're just taught at a very young age to value work, to value career, and to value earning money. Not money itself, but earning money. And the next part of this conversation is really around the guilt of complaining as a person of color. So I sit here complaining about, oh, my job pays me so well and it's so stable and it has so many benefits, but I'm so sad and lonely. Like, that's such a strange concept to my family. Like, I could not explain that to them. My parents were migrants. They came to Australia just a couple years before I was born. They weren't able to speak any English. They grew up around war and famine and poverty, and they came to this country and they said, we're gonna work really hard so that our kids can have a better life. And they did do that, and I will never be able to repay that kind of gift that they've given me. Any form of complaining that I do, anytime I face any hardship, anytime I feel like I can't handle something or that I feel overwhelmed, I think back to my parents who would have had the same hardship but tenfold. Nothing I struggle with will ever compare to what they had to struggle with. And that, I think, causes a lot of issues among our generation because we are constantly trying to repay this eternal debt that we have. And we're taught that to have a comfortable life that our parents were never able to have, we need to have successful careers. We We need to have good corporate jobs. We need to have a stable income. We need to have all these things to ensure that we don't have to worry like they had to worry every day of their lives. And as I sit here and I say this, I don't mean to alienate anyone who may be white and perhaps didn't have those kinds of struggles in their life, but I really thought it was important to have that in the discussion because it really does shape a lot of the way we feel about our work, and it shapes a lot of the fact that despite all the complaining I'm doing, I don't see myself quitting my job. And that kind of leads to the final part of this conversation, which is quitting our only option? When we're faced with these kinds of challenges, when we face these kinds of daily struggles, do we quit that? Do we do something different? What's the answer? Now, I would love to get to this point of the video and just say, yeah, I'm quitting my job and so should you. But no, sadly, that's not the point of this video. I'm sorry. The realism of this world at the moment is that we are forced to kind of stay put for now. And I mean that in the context of the fact that, you know, we are living through a once in a century global panoramic, so we don't really have a lot of options in terms of movement due to border closures. You know, we can't even travel, which used to give so many people in this position the sense of freedom that comes with escaping your job or escaping your home. But just because there is a global Panasonic, it doesn't mean we need to accept the way things are. So my answer is no, quitting is not your only option, but there are a few things I think you should start to think about if anything I'm saying in this video is starting to resonate with you. So I'm going to go through a few things that I've started to do and I hope that you start to do as well. So here's what you can and should do. So number one, accept the fact that your job is just a job. Now this was really hard for me because for the longest time, my job was all I had. And I convinced myself that I was on the right path in my life because of this job. But it's taken a lot of critical self-reflection for me to realize that at the end of the day, this is a job. At the end of the day, this is not my life. Any success that I have in this job is not a reflection of my success. Any failures I have in this job is not a reflection of my failures. You know, you go to your job, you do the best you can do, and then once you switch off, switch the fuck off. Which leads me to my second point, which is if you are working, you need to speak to your boss and set clear boundaries. This probably sounds so obvious, but I can assume that if you've made it this far into this video, you're probably too afraid to even have this conversation because it takes admitting to yourself that there is a problem, and that's not something you want to bring up to a corporate boss because you don't want them to think that you are a human being. You want them to just think you're a machine that can do anything they need you to do and make sure you hit all the deadlines that you have to hit, or make sure you do all the work that you need to do. Whether it's say, I will not work past 5 p.m, I will not check my emails after dark, I will not do any work on the weekends. You need to let people know that your weekend time is your time and you need to fill that time. Having these clear boundaries will help you with my next suggestion. So my next suggestion is kind of a two-parter. So number 3 is fantasize more about your life without work and start to do it. Once you've set your boundaries, let's say it's outside of 9 to 5, so between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. and 10, 11, 12 a.m., whatever time you go to bed, ask yourself, if you weren't working this job, what would you do? Go and do that. It's strange to me that people don't appreciate your accomplishments outside of work nearly as much as they appreciate your accomplishments at work. My 4th tip is learn something new. Again, this kind of just sounds like duh. So whether it's at your current job, whether it's some studies, whether it's extracurricular studies, focus on learning something new, even if it doesn't help your current career trajectory. I'm very lucky that the company I work for provides us with like free LinkedIn learning and bunch of different programs, so if we wanted to learn something, we can just go sign up to a course without having to pay for it. I've been doing a lot of that lately and just learning things that have nothing to do with my degree. Like I enrolled myself into a course randomly to learn how to code. I've done a course on leadership. I did a course on change management. I've done a course on public speaking. I've done some courses on video production, which I think has been very helpful. But moving forward, I want to focus less on like professional development and focus a little bit more on exploring my creative side. A big part of that is obviously YouTube, making videos, making content in whatever way I can. One of the things I've always been doing ever since I was a kid was entertaining. I love making people laugh, so that's why I thought YouTube was such a natural kind of choice for me. Plus, I've been watching YouTube on like a daily basis since like 2009, I think. So it seemed like a natural thing for me to start making content. But I also want to do some painting classes, pottery classes, or a life drawing class. Finding things to learn is just the most rewarding thing in and of itself because you just explore different parts of yourself that you didn't even know was there. So that's my biggest advice, just keep exploring the different parts of you so that you can start to understand who you are as a person and what makes you happy. My final kind of tip is call your old friends. Obviously, because of the pandemic, a lot of us were cut off from our old social groups, and not to any fault of anyone, but it's just the fact that life just got in the way, the pandemic got in people's way, we're all stuck at home and blah 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 blah. There's only so many Zoom calls you can do before you want to throw your laptop off the balcony. But reconnecting with people from both my childhood, my high school days, and my early university days has been so fulfilling over the past few weeks that I'm starting to feel like a little bit of my old self again, which I just think is really important, and I'm just so happy that I've been able to do that. So yeah, call your old friends, see what they're up to, go get a coffee. Like, why are you wasting your time at home? Check how many of them have had babies in the last year. A lot of my high school friends have had babies in the pandemic. So with all my suggestions, I've kind of come to the conclusion of this video. One final thing I guess I want to relay to you is that we all need to accept that our job and our work is not who we are as people. So whenever people now ask me, what do you do? I never mention my job anymore. I want to start telling people who I am as a person. So I guess if you've made it this far into the video, I want to tell you who I am as a person. I'm Farhad. I'm 26, I love reading, I love playing video games if I'm being honest. I love going to art galleries, I love going to museums, I love learning about culture, and I love learning about people. I love fashion, I love vlogging. Oh my god, I love creating things, I love traveling, I love nights out with my friends, I love nights in with my friends, I like trying out new places and new experiences. I love being in nature, I love being by the beach, I love seeing the ocean, I love feeling the ocean. I love looking up in the clouds and wondering what this all means. I love seeing the sunset and I love feeling the red warmth against my skin. I don't know, I'm just naming things now. I could probably make a whole video about all the things that I love to do. So I want to turn it back to you now. Whoever you are, wherever you are in the world watching this video, who are you? What do you do? What is it that makes you happy? What is it that you're here to do? What is it you want to do? I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you've made it this far, like, holy shit, thank you for listening to me ramble for such a long time. I hope you were able to experience some comfort knowing that you're not alone and that your feelings are very valid, especially if you are feeling lonely. Believe me, there are so many people out there who feel the exact same way as you do, and there is some comfort to that, and the comfort kind of comes from supporting each other through this kind of mess of a world we're living in. I really hope you can stick around and subscribe for my future videos so that we can just try and figure out what the hell we're supposed to do next. So I guess until next time, bye!